Hello, everyone. This is Michelle Brantner, Superintendent of Schools in the Marcellus School District, coming to you from my office with a special guest today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Sonnacchio. I'm the business administrator here at Marcellus.
So generally this time of year, we have completed budget preparations and we're preparing for our annual budget hearing. That's about a week ahead of our budget vote. And that'll be taking place on Monday, May 8th at 7 p.m. in the high school in the large group instruction room. And we have a tradition here where we do try to recreate that budget hearing for you in a video form and put that out at least a little bit advance of the budget hearing so that folks can either check it out or people that are not able to come to a budget hearing would still have an opportunity to hear all the budget information and hopefully get any questions you might have answered. So here goes. We'll run through what that presentation will look like on Monday, May 8th at 7 p.m. So first of all, there's a series of terms that we'll be using. I like to start by listing some of the terminology that we use in budget development and in talking about the budget. So if there's any of those terms you're not sure of, you may want to brush up on your definitions before we get rolling. So from there, our budget development process takes lots of different forms depending on what the fiscal climate is. But I'm going to start by giving you some fast facts. Our total budget that we'll be requesting for the coming year is $40,202,463. And there's a few drivers in that budget that we're going to dig into a little bit more. So some of the facts include a little bit larger reliance on our appropriated fund balance. You can see that's going from about $1.5 million to $1.8 million. This is an increase in it's sort of like using a part of your savings account. And this is something that school districts, pretty much every school district, relies on using some appropriated fund balance from year to year. I like to think of it as funds that are in your budget that are planned for use. They're a revenue source that helps support the beginning of the school year before other revenues are flowing. So there's sort of lots of different ways you can think about the use of this money, but it's a very typical use. You could look back at all the videos we've ever done about our budget and you would see the same thing. Next year is slightly different in that we're increasing the use temporarily. We do have the ability to do that, but we're a lot more comfortable sitting at a little bit lower amount of planned usage. And so in order for us to get back there, we do have a 3-year plan to mitigate that increase by making some very targeted reductions that you'll be hearing about over time. This also relies on a 2.5% tax levy increase. Probably all of you at this point know that we have a cap in school districts. It's been known as the 2% property tax levy cap, but it rarely is exactly 2% because this is a number that's a result of about a 9-step formula. And that formula has a lot of drivers in it that can push that number in excess of 2% as it is for us this year, and also times below 2% and sometimes even lower than that. So this year our number is 2.5%, and because we are at our cap rather than exceeding it, our budget will pass with what's known as a simple majority, 50%. You'll see 4 propositions on the ballot when you come to vote this year. The first is the school budget, that really is the main topic of our conversation today. The second are bus purchases. The school district has a long-standing history of a bus replacement schedule that we follow pretty religiously. So we do have buses that are up for replacement this year, and this proposition will keep us up to date on that replacement plan. We also are asking for voter approval for moving some funds into our capital reserve. We established a capital reserve several years ago. The cap on that is a $5 million reserve, and we currently have used or plan to use 1.7 million of that capacity. So what we'd like to do is fund the remaining capacity. That money will come into play in completing the current capital project that we're engaged in, probably supporting phase 3 of that project, which is the construction of our agriculture facilities. And we don't necessarily anticipate needing to expend all of those funds, but we would be able to in the event that we needed to. Those funds are available, and we just need to move them into that account with your approval. And then the last is the school district is responsible by law for assisting local libraries, if there is one in your community, with placing their request for any tax increase on our ballot. So that can be a little bit confusing. This is one of those legal things. And so our local library this year does need an increase, and you'll see that on the ballot for your consideration. So digging in a little bit deeper, we do have some additions to the budget and also some reductions. It's pretty typical that you go through a process where you approve a budget. It seems like there's a lot of precision. There's a very specific number we're asking for. But honestly, school district budget plans, while we generally have a really good plan, they are estimates. There's a lot of unknowns going into any school year, and you're going to see some of those reflected even when we talk about the additions to the budget. So the first one is that from the time we approved the budget last year to where we sit right now, we had to increase our number of teaching assistants by 7. And all of those positions were ones that were required due to services that were required through the legal Committee on Special Education process. And so we needed to provide those positions in support of students that had very specific and specialized needs. So that's, a pretty significant increase year over year, but a necessary one. The second is an increase of a school social worker at our middle school. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that the COVID-19 pandemic had quite an impact on schools for a variety of reasons. And we had long, even prior to COVID, needed to really consider adding some additional support services for students and families at the middle level. And we ended up really needing to do that post-COVID. And so that position was added late last year after the budget was already approved. And then we also have an exciting addition. We do believe that we're able to add one additional UPK section for next year. Obviously, some of you don't know what UPK stands for. It stands for Universal Pre-Kindergarten. 2 years ago, we were able to add one section. Last year, we added another. This year, we're adding a third. But I'll be honest with you, we aren't really certain the longevity of that third section, whether or not the funding stream that's currently available will continue. So more to come on that. The typical local share for a UPK classroom, meaning after the funding that we receive, is somewhere in the area of $44,000 to $45,000 on the local share. So as we continue to flesh out, we have some federal dollars available to us to support Universal Pre-Kindergarten that are temporary. While we flesh that out, I'm sure there'll be more to come on the UPK front and the longevity of that third section. We also had been carrying an administrative position that we did cut. We've been pretty committed to staying as administratively skinny as possible, but we had some question when we cut our last position whether or not we would be able to accomplish all of the required tasks that the state of New York puts upon administrators. And we do feel pretty comfortable at this point that we are able to accomplish those tasks. And so this reduction will actually hit the budget in the 23-24 year as a reduction. We also have had the benefit of having a career counselor, and we do believe at this point with our enrollment figures and the counseling staffing that we have, and also the infrastructure and processes we built, that we'll be able to support our students' career counseling needs with the elimination of this position as the person filling the position retires. And then last but not least, we're going to eliminate in the coming year a transfer that we have historically made to our school lunch program. One of the sort of benefits of the COVID times and having breakfast and lunch fully funded for a limited period of time is that our school lunch program really was able to sort of get back on their feet. We're hoping that this is a change that we can sustain, but if not, we may see the day again where we need to provide some additional support to fund that program. So there's questions that arise from time to time about the COVID federal relief dollars that school districts were given. And we did address this last year at our budget hearing. And I want to make sure we address it again, because this was a 4-year commitment made by the federal government to provide school districts with additional funding. And it was largely targeted at supporting needs school districts might have as a result of the pandemic. And the uses of the money was fairly broad. And school districts all did some planning 3 years ago, trying to figure out exactly how this money would be expended. We had a pretty short window of time to come up with a plan. And so Marcellus made the decision that we were going to create the most flexible plan possible. So if I were to describe to you how that money is being utilized, I would say our goal was not to put it towards what I would consider making it one-shot revenue, which means, or it is one-shot revenue, excuse me, I'm misspeaking. We didn't want sustainable costs being supported with one-shot revenue, because what happens after the 4 years is up and the money is gone, the district is left to figure out, how do we support these things that we've added? So we took a very conservative approach, and we've been able to use that money to really support students and their needs, but to do so in a way that we feel like is sustainable. We also are leveraging those dollars to provide us with infrastructure changes and things that we can do to enhance our facility, similar to all the agriculture programming we've been talking about and the facility support for that. And these are things that will provide the district with resources for decades to come. So a very smart use of one-shot revenue is anything that's going to last a really long time. We also were able to, as I said before, deal with the immediacy of some of the things that we were seeing with COVID. So we were able to enhance some services to students, take some programs that already existed in some form and expand them. We were also able to add some programming. One example would be some summer school programming that we've done the last 2 years, so that students that had learning loss and actually were in jeopardy of not receiving credits could receive some credit recovery support, but also enhanced learning experiences that would help them start off on the right foot in the coming year. And then, of course, we've been in a great partnership with our county to provide some additional mental health supports. Some of those services we don't anticipate needing in perpetuity, but there are some services that we will continue with, like agency partnerships, and also housing some of our local counseling services within the 4 walls of the school system, so that students and families are able to access that counseling that can be difficult to access due to travel limitations and also getting slots. So we've been able to do some great things with that money, but also protect the district. There was a recent article that came out in the Onboard publication, and it's speaking about a fiscal cliff that is to come. And it's directly referencing how many districts chose to leverage those federal dollars. And they used it in ways where they, in some cases, added a lot of positions and services in a way that they won't be able to sustain when that money dries up. And I'm really pleased to say we were very careful about doing that. So I don't anticipate Marcellus experiencing a fiscal cliff as a result of the federal dollars dissipating. So some additional drivers to the 23-24 budget. We are seeing, as we always do, annual contractual staff increases, but there's a major portion of those increases that are attributed to the things that I referenced earlier. So the addition of the 7 teaching assistants for student support, and also the addition of the social worker. The rest of the increases go towards contractual salary increases and also increases in cost for healthcare for employees. And you can see that actually in the next line, increases in employee benefit costs. That's your ERS, TRS. Those are the 2 retirement systems that we pay premiums to. And then also our healthcare premiums that we support for our staff members. We also have slight increases to debt service. This is really due to pretty minor fluctuations. We have a great process of planning out debt service over a number of years, and there's generally small fluctuations due to cost changes or interest changes when we go to bond for buses, for example. Next, we have some decreases in our BOCES instructional program. This is pretty exciting because this generally means that we have students that have successfully completed a course of study, and they may have slots in specialized programs through BOCES that are no longer needed. Or in some cases, students that we were paying tuition for to very specialized programs have now come to a point in their development where they're able to return to their home school. And so we're very excited about when both of those things happen, and that scenario is the reason we're seeing this savings. And then we also talked a little bit earlier about that decrease in the transfer to the school lunch program. So we always like to give some comparative data just to make sure that we're keeping an eye on how we're faring regionally. So here's a lineup of 14 school districts in our region, from small, medium, large. And you can see that we consider ourselves on the smaller end of districts. We have about 1,500 students, UPK through 12 at this point. And here's a listing of what the 22-23 tax rates are. Those are obviously the known tax rates at this point. And you can see that we're sitting towards the bottom of the pack. Our tax rate for this year is $20.20. And you can see the range goes anywhere from $15.93 up to $21.80. The other point of comparison we like to make is that a lot of times, people are asking, what's the property tax levy increase? And when we say it's 2% or it's 3% or it's 1%, what does that really mean? What is 1%? And how much additional revenue is that affording to a school district? Well, there's quite a range. It's not a consistent number. And you can see that we're towards the bottom of what a percent gives us on our levy in terms of new revenue. And so the range is also, pretty extensive, going from 65,000 for 1% on the levy all the way up to almost $1 million. So 1% on the levy for some districts is nearly $1 million in additional revenue. Marcellus, 1% on our levy is about a $200,000 increase. So you can see we're probably an average amount if you were looking at the mean, not the median. Or do I have that reversed? Yeah, the mean is the average. I'm testing all my old math vocabulary. So at this point, I'm going to turn you over to the money expert in the district, and that's our business official, Tony Sonnacchio.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle has done a great job contextualizing the numbers that are contained within and that make up our school budget. I'm going to give you now the very finite or granular details. There are a lot of numbers here to share with you. So let's start with what we call the three-part budget. The New York State requires that we break our budget down into three components: administrative, program, and capital. And you can see on the slide that's on the screen now that as far as our administrative budget is concerned, it makes up about 7.9% of the district's overall budget. That number is actually quite low. If you were to look at districts within the central New York area and even across the state, that percentage tends to be in the 10 to 12% range. And so this is a strong indicator of how efficient a district is administratively. And again, that number of 7.9% is quite low. You can also see the percentages distributed between program and capital. There's not a lot of context to share with you in that regard. Those percentages are going to fluctuate from district to district. Capital especially is going to be impacted largely by any capital improvement projects that have been put forth into the voters within usually the past 15 years. So not a lot of context to share here. The next slide is giving us a breakdown of our revenues by category, broken down between state aid, real property taxes, and then other sources. The other sources number is probably the most notable bit of information here to point out that our increase is about $580,000 from this current school year to next school year. A great majority of those dollars are realized from increased interest income. We all know that our mortgage rates have increased substantially from a year or so ago, and so that also helps us with our revenues because, and conversely, investment rates also go up. So we've been able to realize an increase in interest income from this year to next year of about $450,000. I'll just mention briefly state aid. Marcellus is what's referred to as a held harmless district, and that's a term that's used to identify districts that are going to receive the due minimum increase in foundation aid. And so that percentage this year for those districts that are deemed held harmless, like Marcellus is 3%. So there's not a 3% increase in total state aid. There's only a portion of this that is foundation aid. That's the value that increased by 3%. But you can see that overall, our state aid increase year to year is only about $120,000. So that's a challenge that we recognize and will deal with, being a held harmless district, and and that's and it's due primarily to two factors. One would be enrollment. So as Michelle had mentioned, our enrollment this year is around 1,500 students. If we were to go back 10 to 12 years ago, our enrollment was around 2,000 students. And so because of that decline in enrollment, that's impacted the amount of state aid that Marcellus receives. And as Michelle had mentioned earlier, the reduction of 7 to 10 FTEs over the next 3 years, we're able to accomplish that because of that decline in enrollment that's now impacting our upper grade levels, or grade levels of 9 to 12. So moving on now to tax rate information. Each year we provide an estimate of what the tax increase would be from this year to next year if the budget were to pass. And so we've laid out a slide here for you showing that for a $100,000 home, taxes in 2022-23 should be approximately $2,020. That's a full value assessment, meaning that's the market value of that home. The estimated amount next year would be $2,071, or a difference of $51 year over year. The reason that we still continue to use a $100,000 home, even though we all know that many homes, if any, in this area would sell for $100,000, we just want to make the math easy for you. So whatever the value is of your home, you can use $100,000 as the basis to estimate approximately what your taxes might look like next year. We've also shown here what the taxes would be after star exemption, and you'll see the bullets down below, which you can read on your own. They're qualifiers, basically, to explain to folks that values will change and they are impacted by equalization rates and assessed values. So these numbers will change from this year to next year. These are simply estimates so that folks realize what the approximate impact would be on their taxes. Going to another slide, just providing the estimated tax rates for 2023, 2024. You can see the tax rate on true value. That's the number that's most relatable, I guess, when we're talking about increases in taxes. So you can see that increase is estimated to be about 51 cents year over year on the tax rate on true. And if you were to multiply 2.5%, which we had mentioned previously, you can see that that 2.5% is reflected in that increase. Again, the qualifier at the bottom showing you some important information. These values will change from once equalization rates and assessed values are received by the district in August of 2023. The next slide speaks very briefly about a contingency budget. So this is something that we're required to notify taxpayers of, that if the budget were to not pass, what happens? There are really two things that could happen. The first option would be for the board to move directly to a contingent budget. And the second option would be to put a revised budget to voters in June. So this is talking about, this slide is referring or explaining if we were to either move to a contingent budget or that second budget were to also fail, we would have to remove some items from our budget, which are non-contingent items like equipment and some non-contingent salary increases. So you can see the dollar values that make up the non-contingent items within our budget. But there's some more important information that's on the next slide. So on the next slide, we can see that same total carried forward from the previous slide of $79,249. Those are the non-contingent items within the budget. But in addition to that, we would not be permitted to increase our tax levy from this year to next year. So without the use of additional reserves, the board would be forced to reduce the budget even further by another $445,000. So you can see that would impact our budget pretty severely if we were unsuccessful in getting a pass on our budget vote either in May or if that second vote were presented in June. The next slide just speaks briefly to our history of reserves. So this is another component that we are required to convey to our community members, and that is where we currently stand with reserves. The one line item that I'd like to point out, two I guess, would actually be our capital reserve line. So we did place the number here of $3.3 million in 2022-2023. So this represents the proposed transfer of dollars from the unappropriated line that you see under 2021-22 of $2,966,000. So if the voters were to support the proposition to fund our capital reserve and to expend from the reserve, dollars would shift from our unappropriated value to the capital reserve line. Otherwise, reserves would remain relatively unchanged in all other categories. You will see the note on the bottom of that slide that this estimate assumes authorization to fund and expend. The next slide speaks to the other propositions other than the budget. So as Michelle had mentioned earlier, there is one proposition for the purchase of buses. Another, as we just spoke about briefly, the funding and expenditure from the capital reserve. And last but not least is the library levy that Michelle had also mentioned previously.
So we're glad that you could join us for this overview of our budget for the coming year. And just a reminder that budget vote across New York State will take place on Tuesday, May 16th, 2023, in our high school auditorium. I think everyone is pretty familiar with coming there to vote. We've been voting there for many years. And we do have 2 board seat vacancies, and we also have 2 incumbents running for those seats, Mr. Sean Eady and Ms. Christine Shea. So we hope you're able to come out and join us for the budget vote. And again, thank you for listening in, and hopefully we were able to answer some of your questions today. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.